All right, we're still in 2 Timothy chapter 2, so grab your Bibles and let's get on it.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again this week for our Bible study as we're going through the first letter that Paul wrote to Timothy, a pastor that he had sent to a church to straighten some things out. And I want to remind us, as we've tried to do each week, is why did Paul write this? And he says in chapter 3, why am I writing Timothy, my son in the faith, why am I writing this letter to him? And he says this, although I hope to come to you soon, I am writing these things to instruct you so that if I am delayed, you will, and here's the purpose, that you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Paul is writing this, and it's great to just know that when we're reading it. The purpose for this is to instruct a pastor on how to teach people they should conduct themselves
Timothy
in the
is
church.
Leading this church in Paul's absence.
Yes.
And so since Paul can't be there, here's what you should do.
And the church, like most churches, has some difficulties.
What?
Paul actually wanted Timothy to stay there to straighten out the difficulties. Therefore, hey, here's a letter so you can be reminded of this is how people should act. This is how they should conduct themselves. Very interesting. He's not saying this is how people should act in business.
No, not at all.
He's not saying this is how people should act doing commerce and life and, things outside. It's very specific, and I think we need to understand this, especially this week as we go into some of these things, that they can be very confusing or countercultural a lot, is that, hey, Paul's saying, this is how I want people to conduct themselves in the gathering of God's people. This assembly of Christians for this purpose. I have instructions on which I want you guys to live by, to follow, to be your character, all these things. So, we got to say, this is a little bit...
This is how you're going to function best as a body.
There's some difficulties in this with interpretational challenges to this. We are going to start...
Non-politically correct
Jesus... God is never politically correct.
Okay.
Just so you know.
That's where we're going.
God's more on this thing called truth, kind of eternal, foundational truth. And he doesn't change that because we change.
Here we go.
Okay. Was that too much? Was that
we'll
political?
See. We'll see.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, here we go. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, starting at verse 8, he says, therefore, I want the men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or dispute. It seems like, wow, why would he give just men this? It's very clear. It's not mankind here. It's males. He said, now, Timothy, I want you to instruct the men in your church to pray, lifting up holy hands. And this is really interesting that he says, without any anger or dispute. And he's not talking about a posture here. Okay. Now, when you pray, you got to lift up holy hands. His point is, now I'm not saying he's not saying lift up hands, but his point of saying this is that your hands, I want the men to pray with clean hands, with clean conscience, without any anger, without any of this dispute stuff. It's like, hey, Timothy, I want you to instruct the Christian men in the gathering to pray with good conscience, to pray with clean hands, to pray without having envy and jealousy and anger and all this stuff in their life. Instruct them, hey, let it go before you come and pray to God. Don't come to God, with all of this stuff built up. Surrender it to God. What he tells the Philippian church is just amazing about, hey, just surrender this stuff, give it to God, let it go. And come to God clean. That's what he's saying here. It's not a posture, okay?
It's attitude.
It's an attitude. Clean hands is his point. I want all the men to pray. Why does he specifically address men there? It's because the men are the leaders of the church. And that's why he's specifically saying, hey, I want the men here. The men are the leaders in their homes. The men are the leaders in the church. So it's even extra important that the leaders here have clean hands, clean hearts. I want them to pray without having any evil or anger or things in their life. So I want them to pray pure. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Not perfect,
no.
But, I want them to pray that way. And then he goes on with an instruction of how people should act in the church. Now he addresses the women. He says, I also want the women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothing. I don't want the women to adorn themselves like that and draw attention to themselves. But here's what I want to instruct the women to do this, to adorn themselves with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God.
Again, context of the church, right? He's not saying women don't ever wear jewelry.
No.
Not the point.
He's not saying that at all. I mean, we got to always watch for attitude and of the heart. That's what's important. And he is talking about a cultural thing here in a sense of where they were living. It was very common for women to braid gold through their hair and to really have this. I'll tell you what, it's almost like a clash in economic state. And he says, hey, listen, you know what, Timothy, instruct the women in your church not to draw attention to themselves with expensive stuff and, making themselves look all this and that.
We're not in the same, or, what you're saying, hey, as followers of Christ, we shouldn't be in that same comparison, which we still deal with today, but that comparison, look how much better I am than you. I'm going to judge my value based on, how we look or how we dress. Like, again, that's why I said, like, as a body within the context of this thing called the church, like, there's no, like, I'm better. Look how much more money I make.
And that was a problem that they were having, and women were dressing that way. It was part of the culture. They brought that into the church of how much more money I have than you, and all this comparison. I'm better. Drawing attention. It comes back to the heart, no different than with the men. It comes back to a heart thing. Listen, in the church, you are people who are an assembly of people who are Christ followers for a purpose of reaching this world. It doesn't matter what you wear. It more matters why you're wearing it. And I don't want women to adorn themselves. I don't want women to draw attention to themselves on how expensive they can dress and how much money they have. I'm not against them wearing that. It's the why. Are you flaunting? That's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. I don't want you to be flaunting your stuff and all that. You know what? I want you to adorn yourself. And basically, he's talking about the heart here again. He's saying, ladies, I want you to draw attention to yourself, not in your money, but in your good deeds and in your heart, in your love for one another, your care for each other, your good deeds to one another. He said that's how women of faith should be. I care more about you than myself. Kind of a thing that it's not about me. It is really the point of this.
That's what's going to set you apart.
Yes, that's what's going to set you apart. Not how much gold you put in your hair or whatever. Yeah, he goes on in verse, what is that? 11. Yeah. This is where it gets a little tricky for us in today's culture. Very specific instructions for the church, so how people ought to act. Now he separates the sexes a little bit here in order. He says, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. Why? For Adam was formed first, and then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Now he goes on, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. This basically has three characters, three statements that he made in that paragraph. And the first one is, I don't want women to assume authority over men. Now, by that, he's saying, I want them to learn in quietness and submission. And here's a huge thing. This is the first time since Jesus came on the earth, the first time that women, either Jewish women or any other cultural, any other religious women in the world, were ever given any respect.
Oh, definitely.
The fact that women were welcomed in to be taught was a huge liberation thing. It was awesome. So now the church is encouraging women for the first time, come in for teaching. Never happened in the temple, never happened in the synagogue, never happened before that women were invited in to learn about God and to be taught. And here they're invited in. Hey, we want you to come in and learn. We want you to learn. But we want you to learn without being disruptive, rebellious, anything like that. Learn in quietness. But here's the key thing. It comes all down to this. It really comes down to a submission thing. And I think this is where we have problems in our culture today. That the word submission is a horrible word,
It's a swear word.
It's a swear word in today's culture. It was never God's intention for submission to be a swear word. Jesus was happy to submit to his Father. He was happy to not be the boss. He was happy to not be in control. As a matter of fact, he said, hey, you know what? I am just thrilled about my role that you've asked me to do. I will submit, Father, to whatever you ask me to. Whether I like it, whether I don't, I will submit. Jesus leads by example of saying, hey, submission's not a bad thing. Submission is a freeing thing. I'm going to do my Father's will. I'm not doing anything on my own. I'm not saying anything on. You know what? I am here submitting to the Father. I'll do whatever the Father says. Submitting is not a bad thing. Submitting is tremendously freeing. It can be a great thing. To be who you are, to operate in your boundaries is a freeing, wonderful thing. To submit, and God is saying, Paul's telling the church here that women, the whole point of quiet, the whole thing about quietness, the whole thing about learning is all about submitting. He does not want women to be in authority over men. That's just the way it is. He don't want to. There's an order there that he goes into why,
which is the next section,
which is the very next thing. Why do I want men to be in authority over women? Why? Because of the culture? He doesn't say that. Because a male chauvinist came up with this? He doesn't say that.
No. I think this is, if you don't read the next couple verses, that's where I think we see so much, even in Christianity today, right? That we like to pick out certain parts that don't fit our culture and say, well, that was just a cultural thing Paul was teaching, right? That was just for that time period. That's not applicable anymore. Which maybe if those verses were separated out and weren't followed up, you might have a little more ground to stand on. Although even that, I'd say it's shaky, but that's a conversation for another time.
It's addressed in other letters.
Here, the next two sentences, right? Clear it up.
Okay, if you're wondering why does God say that men need to be in authority and women need to submit to their husband, to the pastor, to men, generally women to men, not in all of culture, not at your job, whatever, but in Christianity. Why? And he says it very clearly, which we already read it. He says it goes back to creation. This is why I want women to submit to men. For Adam was formed first, and then Eve. Other parts of Scripture talk about this in more detail, about that, Eve was created for Adam. Man was not created for woman, but woman was created for man. And it's a great partnership. If both understand the roles, it's a great partnership.
If one doesn't abuse the other.
Absolutely. And there's more that can be said about that. And he says, and Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. He says, it seems unfair, but because of how God created things, I created man to be the leader. I created Eve, made women out of man, made women to be a helpmeet, to be submissive to be a helper to the man, that I made the man to be in charge, to have authority, and the woman to submit to that man. Now he says... Not
less important,
right?
Let's just clear that up. I mean, I know you covered this earlier, that Christianity and Jesus really set the standard that everybody is equally important to God, has equal availability to God. So not that at all. It's just literally a creation principle that God designed.
It is. It's a creation principle. And now he says that Eve, now he's talking about Eve representing womanhood, that Eve was the one that was deceived, that she was tricked, she was deceived. She shouldn't have been deceived because Adam should have been the one. She should have said, hey, Adam, I submit to you. Should I take this fruit or shouldn't I? That was what she should have done. That's what God created her to do. Here she's talking to the serpent. The serpent's talking to her, and Adam is not taking his leadership role. So she was deceived to do it. Then Adam didn't take his leadership role, which this again condemns all of humankind because of what Adam did, not Eve. Eve was deceived, but Adam didn't take his role of authority and stop it, and he went along with what his wife said, and he just ate it and didn't take authority over his wife, which he was created and should have done. Because they didn't operate, this goes back to the very core of mankind, core of the human race. They did not operate in their roles, therefore sin came into the world.
Ruined everything.
Now, he goes on to say, but women, in general, women can be rescued from this plight that they're in. He says that, I don't really like how it's worded here, but if you really understand what it means, he says, women will be saved through childbearing. It is if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. He doesn't mean saved from eternal salvation or saved from sin. What he's talking about is the reputation, or that reputation, or I think I wrote the word down here, the stigma of having sin blamed on womanhood. What he's saying here is that, hey, women, you can be saved from that condemning stigma.
So thousands of years later, we won't blame it all on Eve.
Right. So thousands of years later, hey, after all, hey, women, you can save your reputation. You're not horrible. You're not worthless. Look you're perpetuating the human race and raising kids to know God. So it's like a saving factor to the stigma, not to sin. This is a saving factor to womanhood, that look at all the benefit, that you're actually the ones that produce children, that you bring on the rate, that look at how much good comes out of you. So your reputation will be saved. This Eve thing's not going to hang over your head forever. After all, look at what God is using you to do.
Which again, don't take this personally. If you're a woman and you're unable to have a child, that doesn't mean that.
Or even if you're not married. He's talking generally for womanhood.
Just don't take it personally.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because it doesn't mean you have to be married and have a child to be saved. That's not at all what it means. So generally speaking, women's reputation, the reputation of womanhood, is rescued or saved through childbearing and raising kids and doing all of that stuff, if it's done in faith and propriety and all of that stuff. So just to kind of summarize this, I know this is a very challenging thing. People have argued about it forever. If you are not a Christian, and a woman especially, and if you are not a Christian, and you're listening to everything in our world and how the world changes, Shaheen brought it up earlier. So oftentimes I hear, the Bible's so old-fashioned. No, the Bible is truth and always has been. This is the foundation of God in creation. It was never meant to be a bad thing that men would lead and women would submit to that. It's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. Problem is, sin is in the world, and it can be very hard. We've just both screwed it up. Yes, and it is so hard. But I would say this, that if each of us, men and women, could submit to God's role on us. And I know that's a sin word too, role. We don't have roles. We do. God created us with order. And again, I just want to reiterate this because it's so important that even Jesus submits to the Father. And as a matter of fact, the Bible instructs us that Jesus Christ submits to his Father. Talking about marriage, the husband submits to Christ, the wife submits to the husband. That this is the order in which God created things to work. The best that they will ever work is God's created order. Jesus is just as valuable as the Father. It has nothing to do with value, talent. You said that earlier.
Yep.
Women are not less than men. It's a role that we have. We have roles in church. We have roles at our job. We have roles at home. We have roles. These are God-given roles. When we submit to them, I think we all discover, every one of us to discover that God's ways are always the best ways.
Isn't that ultimately the case? It's just a trust issue.
It is. It's a trust. God,
I know this isn't what the world is telling me. This might not even be what I want, but do you and I, and there's different spots we all face this, but in this one specifically, do I trust that you know what you're doing?
Yes.
Right?
Yep. That you know what's best for me, for my family, for our culture. You know what's best, and I'll submit to that. And I'll just challenge you with this. If you're having trouble with this, male or female, because I think males, we talk about this someday, of males doing what Adam did, and that is not taking authority, which is your responsibility, and just letting your wife do it.
That's probably the bigger issue.
That's the bigger issue, and that's really what plunged humankind into separation from God, was Adam not taking his God-given authority and not doing that. But I would just challenge each one of you to do this, maybe even this week or after this lesson, to really seek God and ask him. I think every one of us would find at the very core of our heart, God, I'm afraid of responsibility. I'd rather just somebody else take it. But I think for husbands and men, I think you will find in your heart, if you're honest with yourself and allow God to speak to you, you will find that, no, I created you for this. And I think women will find the same thing. If they ask God and say, God, deep inside, did you really create me to be a support system, to be a helper, submit for the sake of unity and cause? Is this my role? And I think, as Paul says in a different place, the Holy Spirit will reveal this to you. All right.
There we go.
God bless. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, we really hope that this video was helpful for you. If you'd like to stay up to date on our weekly content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click on that little bell icon so you can be notified when new videos are uploaded. And if you'd like to support the ministries here at Access Church and help make videos like this possible, there'll be a link in the description below. As always, we appreciate your partnership in helping us draw people into a growing relationship with God through Jesus Christ.